All right. Another riveting day of Tim rambles on about things and wine. SO2 is one of the most important things we play with, and I want to go over some history, and I want to talk about some chemistry. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about management. I might just go through management today, and then tomorrow we can just schedule labs, and just do labs tomorrow. Let's see how things go. I'm willing to play it either way. So the thing is, in wine, and why we talk about SO2 and why it's so important in wine is it carries out a bunch of functions. First off is an antimicrobial. It helps us kill bacteria, helps keep things under control. It gives us an incredible amount of power that other beverages don't have. So we get to use this. Now, don't get me wrong, grape juice, and this is in plenty in spades in all of the juices you buy in the store. Why they don't have to label it on juices in the store, I don't know. I have some ideas, and I'll get to that in a minute, but yes. The other thing is, it's an antioxidant. It helps keep our wine from turning brown and falling apart. It inhibits that polyphenol oxidase in juice, which can be a good or a bad thing. Whether we want to get rid of the tannins or we want to keep them. That's a good question. The other thing is it binds up aldehyde. So if your wine kind of smells old, oxidized, and sherry-like, that means it probably doesn't have enough SO2 and you need to add some. It's been around forever. This is not a new thing. I love it that we talk about SO2 like it's this horrible toxin, which it can be, but this is something that's been part of humanity for thousands of years, many thousands of years. We know that it was used in ancient Egypt. One of the things that we found in some of the clay pots that stored food in them is they have high levels of sulfur in it, which means they were burning sulfur in some before they put food into it to preserve it. And so we knew this for a long time. So it's been a while. But the real kind of once we really knew about sulfur and we became kind of into the main vernacular, it was roughly 500 years ago. But they give you this particular line from Kellermeister, 3 splinters covered with a powdered sulfur mixed with viola root and incense, if burnt in upturned casks and then sealed, would avoid risks of spoilage. And so one of the things that's really interesting is that if you follow this particular method, the way they lay it out, and you burn the sulfur wick and then you pour the liquid in quickly, you'll get about a 50 part add, 50 to 60 part add, just like we do today. 500 years ago. First English mention was sulfur hath some use in wine. Some do lay brimstone on a rag by a wire and let it down in their cider vessels, and the fire, when lit in the vessel, will be full of smoke, and the liquor speedily be poured in. And that's in 1664. So now we're looking at only 400 years ago. And if you do the same thing, Amory did this back in 1980. They replicated it, got about a 60 part add. Same thing, hadn't changed. Matter of fact, if you do go to Bordeaux, where some places still do what's called saut triage instead of racking, you go to Bordeaux and you see their barrels, they have a bung in the top and they've got a little bung down at the bottom. And that's what they rack out of because they didn't have pumps. So what they would do is take the bung out of the top, knock this little bung out of the bottom, and then the wine would pour out down into a trough that run into a tank. While the wine's going by, the cellar guy sits there with the sulfur candle, holds it right next to it, and it sucks up and prevents the wine from oxidizing as it goes by. We've been doing this for hundreds of years. But realistically, somewhere in the early 20th century is when we were actually able to measure it into wine, started being able to moderate putting it into it. The first types of measurement came around in like the late 1920s, is about when we started to figure out how to measure it. It's about 100 years we've been able to figure out about how much we're really at. But here's where I kind of run into the problem, is that this is the 1988 FDA ruling, and this is more of a bigger picture thing that I think all of us, if we want to stay in the alcohol industry, we want to be around, we need to be aware of. So I'm going to lay out a few examples, but I think they'll make sense for you. I know some may be a little bit unsavory, but we'll stick with it anyway. So what happens very frequently is there's activist groups that come along to do a thing. They get the thing done, and then they don't know what to do because now they've built this big job out of being an activist for a thing. If that thing goes away, and it's not cool anymore, they can't raise money on it, their job goes away, all their funding that they're getting from government organizations, donations, and everything else. So a lot of times, activist organizations pivot to another thing. So my big worry for the alcohol industry is that there was a huge amount of money spent by NGOs, spent by medical associations, spent by God knows everybody to get rid of smoking. And they got rid of it. Basically, smoking is at an all-time low. Me growing up, I can't imagine living in a world where there wasn't smoking restaurants. My grandma smoked. We go over to their house, you know, everybody smoked. And now it's pretty weird when you see people smoking. It's not that common anymore. It's almost more common to see somebody with a joint now than a cigarette. My concern is the entire infrastructure of activism that pushed cigarettes out now needs a new purpose. They don't know what to do. Philip Morris is gone. They should probably reasonably pivot to the god-awful foods that we're consuming being made by the same people that make cigarettes addictive, but they're gonna go to the next sin. Oh yeah, they did. Philip Morris, oh yeah, all those guys, once they got out of cigarettes, they got into food. And they're making food addictive. Foods that are cheap and bad for you, they're making them addictive. The first truly addictive food that was ever made were Fritos. They were scientifically designed and built to make you addicted. Make you not stop eating them all the time. Munchability factor, I think it was 1960s. We started figuring out how to food science foods that people couldn't stop eating. If they can't stop eating them, we'll keep selling them to them because that's what addicts do. So my concern is that those same entities that have pushed cigarettes out are now looked for the new thing. And it is very clear to me that alcohol is the new thing. It is very clear. There are many people getting paid very large sums of money, very famous podcasters that are coming out, taking strong stances against it. It's becoming a whole media ecosystem that now that it's zero, there's zero amount of alcohol that's even safe, you shouldn't even touch it, causes all these problems, everything else. That is in full swing. And one of the first blows that the wine industry got struck, unfortunately the only one that got hit is the wine industry, was in 1988, and this ruling came down through the activism of MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They wanted to try and start pushing wine to be illegal. They wanted warning labels. They're the ones that pushed for warning labels on wine. And we didn't have those labels before, but they're the ones that pushed it. They didn't have on any alcohol, anything else, but then they pushed for the warning labels. Well, in the process, somebody figured out that there's sulfite in wine. So they tagged it on the back of the bill that we have to label that we have sulfites in our wine. Everything else is in it too, but the only thing that got tagged in that bill, somebody with a pen somewhere in Congress or somewhere in the House, on that bill said sulfites as well for wine. And, well, we have to put it on our bottles now. I do find it remarkably amusing that raisins, apricots, cookie dough, grape juice, everything else doesn't have to have that it has sulfites on it, but wine does. And it's moderately annoying to me because it's in everything else. So it creates this false issue about wine that sulfites are really bad for us. And I'm not saying that there aren't people that aren't allergic to sulfites, but, and they are out there. And if they do have a reaction to it, it's generally asthmatic, and you'll swell up in your lungs, and you'll have a hard time breathing. But very few people tend to be actually allergic to sulfites. Vastly more numbers of people are allergic to peanuts, like by the hundreds of folds than SO2. So the fact that we get demonized as an industry for sulfite cracks me up. And everybody uses it. Everyone. This is not just an American thing. Everyone uses sulfur. Whether it's through a wick or a candle or burning it on a rag or using potassium metabisulfite, we all use it. It's every country, yeah.
For other things, do they have higher limits? Is it the same limit?
They don't have to put anything on it. No. No, the only person that ever died in America from SO2 is from a salad bar. We're spraying to stop the polyphenol oxidation found in the lettuce salad. Got a dose of like 900 parts per million, just like 3 times the legal limit in wine, and they got a whack of it from a salad bar. But you wouldn't notice it in a salad bar because the pH would be neutral, so it wouldn't smell like gas. So it's kind of weird to me. Yeah, no, there's no. All the other foods, no, we're the only one. We're it. I find it odd. But anyway, thanks. Now we're stuck. Anyway, when do we add it? We've talked about this. To inhibit PPO in wine, juice browning. Less significantly, scavenges some hydrogen peroxide. But also importantly, it inhibits those acid bacteria. That's why we're adding it to juice. After primary fermentation, again, to inhibit bacteria. It's really good at it. And then also to control oxidation. It's a really good tool. It's a super useful tool, and we're measuring it in parts per million. It's a tiny, tiny amount of the wine. It's not a big amount. It doesn't amount to even a remote percentage of the wine. Why we like it when we add it? It binds strongly and irreversibly in cool conditions to aldehyde. Aldehyde can be our friend and foe, where we talk about how we use it and push it around. You know, if we add too much SO2 or we add it too early in a wine's life, you may not get enough tannin glue because you'll bind it all up to sulfur, and you end up with these really gritty, grippy wines. It's one of the reasons I don't like to do co-inoculation with ML and then come right out with sulfur right afterwards, because a lot of times those wines never get a chance to knit up. Whereas while the mallow's going on, the aldehyde's still hanging out and it's knitting those flavors together. So I kind of like a delayed addition of SO2. Your red wines, we delayed the addition until after Thanksgiving. So it was a full month after we finished the red wine boot camp that those wines sat without sulfur to help knit up the tannins. And I think that's why a little softer. Had I been here and had some time to think about it, I might have pushed the peat barrel off another month. Whoops. We do our best. But it tastes pretty good. Chris tasted all the wines today and he was very impressed. And he tasted the PV and he's like, wow, that's got grip. I'm like, you know you've got customers that want that. And he goes, oh yeah. So we kind of had a nice little taste through. So some things we want to talk about is before bottling, we're going to talk about molecular SO2. I'll get more into that in a second, and why we worry about those numbers in a minute, but we'll get through to those numbers more importantly. How do we add it? We've got a few ways we can do it. You can add it as pure gas. You can buy pure gas. You put it in a thing called a sulfatometer and just inject it into the wine. That's the purest way to do it. I promise you, has anybody here ever worked with pure SO2 gas? Holy hell. It is unbelievably dangerous. It is awful. It burns like nobody's business. You mix up some SO2 and some acid and water, it is nothing like pure anhydrous gas. It is really toxic. You need to have face shields on, and you need to have an organic scrubber that's fit really close to your face, and never use it inside. It's just really rough stuff. If you even get it in your eyes, it turns into sulfuric acid in your eyes and burns your eyes. It's really unpleasant stuff. So even if you're going to use it, you got to be really careful. Sometimes we do stock solutions where we take water, get it cold, and we bubble with a diffusion stone, like carbonating something, into the water, and we can dissolve sulfur, like dissolve CO2, we do in wine. We can dissolve SO2 in water, and then you can get a solution of water and pure sulfur. This is what my preferred method of using sulfur dioxide is. I prefer this. This is my favorite way of using SO2. There's a couple reasons why. Number one, if I want to be organic, this is how I have to do it, because I'm using natural sulfur gas that was organically mined, and then I'm just adding it to water. And if you make organic wine, you have to do it this way, because you can't add potassium metabisulfite, because that's an inorganic chemical substance that was manufactured in a company. And that's why most people use potassium metabisulfite, because it's a pretty stable powder. It's easy to use, it's easy to mix, and easy to dump around. I prefer to use a stock solution because it's water and SO2 only. It does not have any of this. Now, if you happen to be someplace like Germany, where you've got so much acid and so many other problems. Who cares if you throw a little more potassium? Your pH is already 2.9, who gives a damn? But when we're making wine in arid regions, because even in Eastern Washington, where I make wine, we're in a desert. I know most of you don't realize that, you think Washington, you think it's like Seattle. We're a desert. Once you get on the other side of that mountain range, 7 inches of rain through the Central Valley of Washington. There's nothing. It's a desert. It looks just like it. You drive through Yakima, it looks just like this. Same thing. It is no different. And so, you think everybody thinks Washington, they think it's like this green lush place. It's not necessarily. Where I live, I get up against another mountain range where we start to get a little bit more rain. We get about 18 inches of rain where I'm at, but 3 miles directly west of my house, we're down to 10. 3 miles after that, we're down to 7. So 6 miles from my house, you're in a desert. When we're in a desert, we have the same problem you do. We have very little moisture in the air, and all the moisture is in the ground, and all that potassium is getting pumped in our grapes. And so we already have too much potassium. And every time we add potassium metabisulfite, we're adding more. And if you're going to add over the course of a wine's life maybe 200 or 300 parts of sulfur to a wine, even if it does precipitate, you're adding that buffer capacity, you're taking tartaric acid out, and you're fighting a war. So using a stock solution is really the best way to go, because then you can ameliorate adding that potassium. But if you have students that are mixing things up that are powders, the last thing you want to do is give them a corrosive 6% solution they can actually pour in their eyes and burn themselves. Here, have a powder, pour it in your wine, have a nice day. If you have employees, you don't want to worry about getting burnt. Have your powder, have a nice day. It's your risk reward. What do you want to do? The little thing on the right here, I have one of these too. This is my favorite thing in the world. 6% solution in here, nitrogen tank, peristaltic meter. I want 100 mils, I punch it in the computer, I go push a button, it's got a long wand on it, and I put it in the barrel and I go bloop, and it gives me exactly how much I need. And if I want to top up 100 barrels in a day, and I want to hit them all with just a little SO2, I go bloop, I go to the next barrel, bloop, next barrel, bloop, and I make my sulfur adds just like that. $6,000, is it worth it? Maybe, if you have enough barrels. But yeah, it's a sulfur graft. You can get them from Oxark. It's the company that makes them. And I'll talk more about management tomorrow. So we talked about deactivating enzymes. And again, one of the things that also happens is because we're pushing competition out of the way, we get better fermentation kinetics. The yeast tend to ferment better if we add a little SO2. I don't think it's because the SO2 is around. I just don't think yeast care a lot about SO2. But because it knocks the competition out, if you're sitting down at your dinner table, you want to eat a hamburger, and it's just you, eating a hamburger is pretty easy. But if you have 10 chihuahuas trying to get at the burger at your feet, it's going to slow down how fast you eat the burger. The chihuahuas are like the microbes. Yeah, they're not going to kill you. They're not going to hurt you, but they're going to annoy the shit out of you. And that's basically what I think of the microbes are in wine. Yeah, sure, right. Fine, there's these little rats trying to eat my feet, but they're not going to get my burger. I'm still going to get the sugar at the end of the day, but they're annoying. And if we can add a little SO2, we just kind of get them out of the room and we don't like them in the ground, so we have to deal with them the rest of the ferment space. And then we bind these undesirable compounds that result in the wine oxidation. So this is that, this has been done over and over again since 2006. But what we see is in the sulfide in the control must, which is A here, we have a little bit faster initiation of fermentation, but then it slows down. But when we have a little sulfur around, once it gets the sulfur out of the way, we get a more rapid, more complete fermentation. Less likely to stick, less likely to have problems. So a little SO2 helps us by managing the room, by managing managing the bugs in our juice. Again, that idea of microbiological warfare. We're setting the stage, we're laying down the law, you ain't coming here, we're managing the pH, a little SO2, and we can really level the field to make sure that the microbes we want come along, and that's yeast. Saccharomyces does make SO2. There's no way to make SO2-free wine. You can't. You can make low SO2 wine, but yeast will make it. Yeast usually makes somewhere between 10 and 20 parts, naturally. They just make it. They make it out of the stuff they eat. There's usual natural sulfur around, they eat it, make SO2. Some yeast are worse than others. Some yeast make a whole lot. We have these ones, so this like They're called Renaissance yeast. And we have that hydrogen sulfide that we worry about in wine that smells all stinky and reductive. These people, supposedly non-genetically modified yeast, they just put them next to each other and they just schmoed and accidentally made a baby that's genetically modified, but they didn't genetically modify it, according to the literature, whatever. I don't want to get sued. Point being, sure they didn't make hydrogen sulfide, but they made SO2. And I would ferment Sauvignon Blanc with these yeast, and I would consistently have over 100 parts total after ferment. So they would not make hydrogen sulfide, but they just, instead of H2S, they just make SO2. They just mix it around and turn it into something else. So those wines that we fermented with Renaissance yeast, some of the reds, sure they didn't make hydrogen sulfide, but then when we tried to put them through mallow, forget about it. It was into that. So anyway, we'll do that a little bit later on, but the point being, they'll make it. So even in an instance where you're not adding SO2, you're gonna end up with something. And so basically if you have K2SO5, you throw it in some water, you get the potassium that goes flying off, and then you pick up the bisulfite. The bisulfite turns into SO2 at low pH. Don't worry about it. This is what I talked about in wine. So in wine, this is our free SO2. And our free SO2, for the most part, is just sort of this inactive thing that's hanging out. It doesn't do much. This is particularly good at binding up an aldehyde and doing some other stuff, but it doesn't do a lot for antimicrobial action. Only the stuff that's in the gaseous form does. So in wine, most of the sulfite in wine is in this form, but it's something that's not really active. It's kind of hanging out as an antioxidant, not going to be microbial. This molecular piece is the gas. And that's what we remember, we added the gas, the acid, and turned it into gas and pumped it over. The gas is what gets into the cell membrane of things and kills them. So that's why we worry about molecular. And then we have bound SO2, which is all the other stuff that's just bound. And it's bound some stuff temporarily, but this stuff is not able to do anything because it's stuck to something. So the only thing we worry about in wine really is the free, and then that function of free that happens at whatever pH is at in the molecular. I'll get more into that in a second. So bound SO2, it's not very active, it's just hanging out. The only reason why we carry about bound is once we get up to 50 parts total, there's enough there that it's going to inhibit lactic acid or other bacterial issues. Once we're above 50, we're not going to get a secondary fermentation. At the end of the day, that's primarily it. The only thing that is a bit weird, and this is a bit of a double-edged sword with SO2, is that the more you add at the crusher, the more you have to add later on. The more you add at the crusher, the more you have to add later on. If we go back to our fermentation talk, remember I say that it's like sugar, and then it goes all the way down to aldehyde, and then eventually turns into alcohol. Well, the aldehyde dehydrogenase turns it into, it's decarboxylase anyway, it turns it into ethanol. That enzyme gets shut down by SO2. It denatures it. Because remember, enzymes are proteins, it breaks it down, it denatures proteins by polyphenol oxidase, breaks that enzyme down. So what happens is yeast make aldehyde, and then they can't make it into ethanol because that enzyme's broken down. So then they leave the aldehyde behind in the wine, and they leave ever increasing more amounts of aldehyde in the wine, the more SO2 you have up front. And then the more aldehyde you have, the more SO2 you gotta have later to solve that, to bind it up. Alternatively, say you're making a massive red wine that's got huge amounts of tannin. Maybe you want to go to the farthest edge you can because you know you got to get through mallow. Maybe add 100 parts of sulfur at the crusher, make a ton of aldehyde. That would have been great for the PEV in hindsight. Add 100 parts at the crusher, make all this aldehyde, and then you've got all the tannin glue to help knit up the tannins while it's going through. So you can use SO2 at the crusher to push your wine around. Now in white wine sense, basically my only rules are, am I going through mallow or not? Red wine, we got all sorts of other crazy shit going on. But white wine, mallow or no. Those are my rules. So if I'm going to go through mallow, less than 50. If I want to go through mallow, more. And I might even measure the juice. The second it's off the press, we'll go check it, and I might add enough SO2 to make sure that I'm above 40, 50 parts right at the beginning of fermentation to make sure I don't go through now. If I'm trying to make a really crisp, bright, vibrant white, we do that. We did that with a reason. I came in, it said it had 30 at the crusher. It said on the container. We measured it, it had none. So I added 50 parts to the juice, but it had been frozen and sitting around for a while. I measured it again after we'd added 50 parts before I started ferment. We still only had 30 parts total because there was enough crack around that it bounded and fell out. So I had another 20 parts on top of that. So I've already added about 70 parts of sulfur to that wine right off the bat because I don't want it to go through mouth. And it's also reason because what the hell? Just add. And then, yeah, down it just kind of hangs out. So free molecular, this is what matters, is that molecular is the most powerful species of SO2. It doesn't matter antioxidant-wise, but as an antimicrobial, it matters. And it's all based on pH. I'm going to go through this. I'm not going to show you the chemistry because we're not going to be here, but I do care. This is the picture I'm trying to show you. This is all the sulfur. So we have all this SO2 in the wine. Only the tiny little bit is what goes to gas. So even if we had, a whole bunch of free SO2, only a tiny bit of it is going to be in its molecular form, depending on the pH of wine. And why this is important here is that in wine, why we care about molecular is that's what keeps our antimicrobial state. That's what keeps yeast in line, it keeps everything in line, as long as we get our molecular SO2 to about 0.5 milligrams a liter. And why this matters to you is that this chart tells you what it takes to get to 0.5 milligrams per liter at any particular pH. So the Riesling is around here now because we added some acid to it. We need about 20 parts free. Let's say we're doing a white wine. So maybe we need about, roughly 30 parts free to have a really safe wine that's not going to oxidize or not going to have a microbial issue. And if we're doing a red wine, which is our red wines that we're managing, all of our red wines are right around this range. So we need about 30 parts to get to that molecular number. But if you start making wine at pH 4.0, in order to get your molecular up, you got to have 70 parts free. Oh my God, that's a lot of sulfur. Yeah.
Is this the amount of bottling?
Well, just during aging. Well, so here's your question. This is the question. This is where things kind of get fuzzy. During aging, yes. And this is why I say that a lot of winemakers just get the pH down as low as they need to, because then they don't have to add a bunch of sulfur. Get the pH down, get it safe. Then you don't worry about it. If you want to deacidify and bring the pH up later, fine, before you go to bottle, but then you got to filter. Because when we're only worrying about SO2 as an antioxidant, we just have to have some free as an antioxidant. This is for antimicrobial. So this is for the microbe piece. So for microbes, we need to have it at this level. And if you wanted to get to a 1 milligram per liter in some ridiculous sweet port style wine where you had enough free to act as an antimicrobial, you need 150 parts total. That's never going to happen. So one thing you can do is you can take the need for an antimicrobial out of the equation. You can just get rid of it. What would you do if you wanted to your wine if you wanted to make sure you didn't need an antimicrobial? No. No. Do you need an antimicrobial if you don't have microbes? What would you do to get rid of the microbes? No. It's a machine. No. Could be. That's one start. You're on the right path. It can do it. There's another thing that does it. Leaks all over, made a big mess. Filter. If you get the microbes out, you don't have to worry about having molecular SO2. All you do is get some number that makes your wine taste good. And you want it to age for a particular period of time. This is only for antimicrobial and aging. So we only worry about molecular SO2 for antimicrobial purposes while the wine's aging out. But once the wine's filtered, whatever. It's gone. Once the microbes are gone, you don't care.
Is that the right size?
0.45, yeah, because the smallest microbe in wine is Pediococcus. It's about 0.5 across. Yeah, that'll get you sterile filtered. I'm not even There we go. Ooh, misspelling. One of my favorite misspellings of all. It loses efficacy at high pH. So making high pH wine, so the reason why I'm so worried, the ethos of all of this at the end of the day, we're talking about pH and SO2, the two most important things we can play with in wine, right? If we start making wine at pH 4.0, the most powerful tool we have at our disposal for antimicrobial and antioxidant in wine becomes useless at pH 4.0. So once we get up above 4.0, this unbelievable tool that we've been using for thousands of years for food safety to make quality wine, it becomes useless. So that's why we kind of worry about pH, because if not, we can't use our favorite tool. It would be like taking the hammer away from a carpenter. Unless you're a gringo like me that screws everything together because I don't like to nail anything, so I use screws because that's just the way I am. So anyway, the point is that we just really want to make sure that we do worry about it. But this has Washington, Michigan, New Mexico too. But alcohol also works together. So pH and SO2 work together, but alcohol also comes along. If we start having high alcohol, we got 16% alcohol, we don't really worry about much about antimicrobials. So it's kind of this complex matrix of pH, SO2, alcohol. But if you're making 9% alcohol wines that are higher pH, terrifying. God knows what's going to grow in it. Or maybe you do want things to grow in it. Everything will grow in it. It'll taste weird. And you'll become the most famous winemaker ever for making the weirdest tasting wine ever. I've seen it, I know it, I've lived it, and I think as long as you sell it with gumption and that it's your vision, or either, well, it's kind of funny, the ability to be a cult leader is like a fine line. So either, if you ever, the ones that work, they work, the other ones don't. So anyway, so other thing that's important to know is that color, we do have that ability to push our tannins around, but also when you add SO2, it bleaches your color. We can really do a lot of damage to our color if we have to use higher levels of SO2. So if you're making this pH 4.0 wine, where you've got to have 78 parts free SO2, you're going to have no color. It's going to just make it all brown and weird and gross looking. Matter of fact, we go in the back and I'll make sure to grab some wine and we'll throw a bunch of SO2 and I'll watch you, show you what color it turns into and you're going to go, ew. Talked about that, and yeah, so we just got to worry about our color because using SO2 doesn't harm us. And the first time you ever make your beautiful Malbec and you add the SO2 and then you look at it the next day, you will cry. The good news is it's reversible and it comes back. I don't want to do that. I don't know why I got Sabrina. This is why I'm sad that my lecture, my hard drive crashed, because I got the academic lectures that I give, not the fun ones. That's all I have now. I don't have the ones with fun gifts. Anyway, yeah, I'd rather just talk about this than tell you anything else. Oh, this is important to know. Yeah, top line's good. That's worthwhile. Underline that one. Don't add SO2 during fermentation. If you add it during fermentation, yeast just grab it, they suck it out, they put it in their sulfur and hydrogen sulfide to make wine steam. So don't add SO2 during fermentation. And this is an important note for people that try to make sweet wines. A lot of people try to stop fermentations with sulfur. They'll add like 200 parts of sulfur and hope that it shuts the yeast down. It won't shut them down. It will just make it smell really bad. And they'll end up with a bunch of sulfate in the wine and you won't be happy. If you want to stop a ferment, you want to arrest a ferment, the first thing you do is get it really cold. Stop the yeast with cold. Shut them down with cold. First one. And then if you want to add some sulfur afterwards, fine. But the best thing to do is get the yeast down. So that's why I love the fact that we're working in a place that has a centrifuge, because if I want to arrest a fermentation, that's a really fun way to do it. Anything below 50 will really put them to bed. Anything below 40, they'll definitely be sleeping. Remember, we're all born out of the same soup? What temperature you soaking in wine would it take, or water, before you went hypothermic and you stopped living? I don't know. 50? Probably I would be willing to bet you after a few hours in a tank of 50-degree water, you'd go hypothermic. I don't think you'd be able to keep up. Most people wouldn't be able to keep up with it. I'm sure there are people out there, I'm sure some crazy Russians out there that you can stick in a tank of water that's 50 and they laugh and think it's funny while fighting a bear. But you know, there are those, Nordic people that do that stuff for fun. But if you do a real cold plunge in just like 40-degree water, you're in a matter of 3 minutes, you'll shift your body temperature down a couple of degrees, and that's enough to really start messing up your metabolic processes. So at 50 degrees, I don't imagine it would take long. And same with yeast, 50 degrees, they'll go to sleep. Get them down to 40, they'll really be asleep. The only thing is about yeast, they don't die. They just go to sleep. They just go to sleep, they'll fall on the bottom of the tank, and then you add some sulfur and they're asleep while they're asleep. But if you warm it up, they will wake back up. And get it filtered. Get it cleaned off. Get it cold, get it cleaned off, and then add sulfur. That's the best thing to do. But that's what's great about centrifuges, is then you can just get rid of them pretty much 90% on the way, get it cold, add some sulfur, and you're done. SO2 is an irritant, it sucks. And I'm hoping tonight, because when we get done, I do have these really nice Rieslings, the JJ Proms, and I want to taste them, because they are notorious for cranking their sulfurs. And we'll see if we can smell it in molecular form in their wines, and then I think we should spend at least a few minutes running them, just to see what the free SO2s are. And then maybe we'll do totals tomorrow or something for practice. But I've got some kick butt Rieslings, and I'd like to try them because I like really good Riesling. Other things too is that long-term exposure to SO2 does show increased risk of cancer, particularly people that work in paper mills because they work around a lot of sulfur dioxide gas. I don't know, I do know that most of my friends that are winemakers, after a particular period of time, we develop some sensitivities to it, and I have to be really careful around it or I get sinus infections. So whenever I'm adding it, I want to be outside and be really careful to stay away from it, because I've noticed I'm developing, over the years, I've been developing things that start to happen as I interact with it more and more and more. So even though I love it as a tool, it's something you need to respect and use judiciously.
Can you wear that?
Yeah, there's masks that work really well. They don't work so well for me because I have this ridiculous thing hanging off my face. But I don't have any control over this. My daughter is in charge of my beard. I put her officially in charge of my beard in 2020. So she would have been like 6 or 7 at the time. And so she tells me what I can and can't do with it. She likes it where it is now. Now that she's 12, it's not as fun to do beard salons, but I've had many a beard salon, and you haven't lived until you've had a full-on painted pink with butterfly barrettes in your beard salon. I have one of these giant red heart sunglasses where I look like a cross between Isaac Hayes and God knows what, with all this pink stuff in my beard, but hey, makes her happy. We just did this, but I'll talk through it again. But basically, this is aeration oxidation method. This is the side. It's great. We put our wine here, and we suck it up and over. We make some sulfuric acid here, and then we titrate it back to sodium hydroxide. You saw us do it. Don't need to go too far into it. Downside, 20 to 30 minutes for each sample. Holy Christ. And one of you is going to draw the lucky straw on bottling day to run them while we're bottling. You're going to sit there at the sulfur still while we're bottling, pulling samples off the line and running them to make sure we're not getting fluctuations. You want to do it? He's not. Or you two. You guys can rotate. Well, actually, we'll do a couple things because I'm going to need a couple things. So we're going to do, for proper compliance, we need to measure volumes and free SO2 and pH. So we're going to set up a lab, and I might as well throw some TA in there just for fun. And I want to run beginning, middle, at least beginning, middle, and end of bottling. Probably every 25 cases we'll run a sample. And so we'll set up volumes and all that stuff. And we'll have some people labs, keeping records, keeping it all real straight, all perfect. That's a very important piece of bottling. Do you have a dissolved oxygen meter?
I can look. I
You
don't
probably.
remember.
I'm sure you have it. But if you have dissolved oxygen, I'd like to make sure that too. So we'll do some fun stuff. But I want to make sure that we're doing, we need to set an example for bottling of what we're supposed to do. Because even in Walla Walla, where we're supposedly like all fancy, the trash I see done on bottling lines still to this day has my jaw on the floor. Just the unbelievable, like, not measuring a damn thing, not checking a damn thing, and it's all, you have to do it. You have to do, this is TTB required, volumes at least is required. But the fact that like people don't check anything, and the number of people who come to me, they've got wines that have like, you know, at the beginning of the bottling run, they've got, you know, 30 parts of SO2, and at the end they've got 300. Because they just poured it on top and didn't mix a damn tank. You know, I mean, just all, like, it happens all the time. And I'm like, I thought we, you know, here I'm thinking we're this like evolved wine region, and we're still not. People still do dumb stuff. And then here's the Ripper method. This is the one I talked about, reaction of SO2 and iodine. It's not very accurate, it's kind of hard to res. The good news is, if you can set up this analysis, it's really hard to set up and calibrate on a whole winemaking scale, because you have to have a very finite scale to measure ascorbic acid at a really, really tight number to be able to standardize your titration. And then the other problem is that it has a lot of interferences. So who here added ascorbic to their wine? The way that it works is it reacts with two things in wine, but it reacts very quickly, the iodine, SO2 and iodine, but guess what else reacts with iodine? Ascorbic acid. Because iodine is an oxidant, and ascorbic acid is an antioxidant. So if you add ascorbic acid, you can't use this method on your wine. It completely nukes the entire result. So rippers, the nice thing about rippers is if you have a white wine that you have not used ascorbic acid on, and you're bottling, it only takes you about a minute to run a test. Upside. Downside is ascorbic acid nukes the whole thing. Those titrettes I told you about for a home winemaker, like I said, they sell in their little blocks. I mean, if I get to sell with grain tomorrow, if I get time, I'll go grab some. We'll test them, see how they do. We'll try them. So this is not ideal. It has problems, but a lot of wineries use it because it's easy. So AO is acknowledged for better precision and accuracy. We have all these issues with it. AO has potential for interferences from volatile acids if they boil over. That's why we have that condenser. So Ripper, you know, I used to do them in lab. I would do the Ripper versus the AO method, but then I'd throw ascorbic in a couple of wines and then watch my students just figure out why does this wine have 700 parts per million of sulfur? Well, it doesn't. It only has 30, but the ascorbic messes it up. So there's no perfect method, but AO does tend to win. Real quick, one slide summary. Sulfur dioxide acts as an antimicrobial and antioxidant. It is the most powerful tool we have in wine next to pH. SO2 can be free or bound. Sometimes it gets bound, it's usually an aldehyde. You'll find out in winemaking, we think we're making alcohol, we manage aldehyde. Because that aldehyde eventually becomes alcohol, or we can make it turn into other stuff. So I find myself in my career thinking myself more of an aldehyde manager than an SO2 manager, or alcohol manager. And again, main species in wine, there's a little bit there, but it depends on pH. That's the molecular free, and at some pH, that free becomes molecular. Lower the pH is better. But here's your walk in the line difficulty. I'll back up to this slide. Making wine here is hell. Bottling wine. This you won't smell. This you might smell. This you will smell. And anything around here you'll definitely smell. Okay? Why this is hell? If you're making a pH 3.0 Riesling, you're going to bottle, you get your aroma flavor just right, and while you're bottling, no matter what you do, you're going to pick up some oxygen. That oxygen's eventually going to eat some of your SO2. So you have to play this game of throwing a dart at a moving target and hope that you get your SO2 above this while you're bottling, so it'll smell terrible while you're bottling it. But then 2 weeks after you bottle, when 8 to 10 parts goes away, it falls here. So you bottle it and then hope that it falls back in line. But if it doesn't fall back in wine, then you have wine that smells like sulfur. Even though it's only 25 parts, it'll blow your head off. Just make you cough and gag. So making low pH wines is really hard to get your sulfurs right. And I can see why the German producers that produce wines at 2930 frequently crank the sulfur, because they know they've got to get it to market, they know it's got to drop, and then hopefully it comes down before it smells bad. So it's really hard to get your sulfurs just right and get really, really low pHs, because you only have a few parts of wiggle room. Whereas when you're around here, pH 3.5, okay, I go to bottle at 30 and it drops down to here. I'm still above this number. I'm not going to smell it, but okay, I'm in a good number. And generally, SO2 in a red wine drops about, depending on closure, 5 to 10 parts a year. So if you know your closure is going to drop 5 parts a year, you go to bottle at 35 parts, you know you got 7 years for that wine to be good on the shelf. You know it's not going to smell bad, you know it's going to taste bad, because it's not too high to mess up with any of your organoleptic properties of the wine, any color, anything else. And you know you got time for it to drop. You got a 7-year age on that wine before that wine's going to start to fall on its face. That's really awesome. But when you have to do that same thing at pH 3.0, and you go to bottle with enough so that when you come out of bottle, not that you make many red wines at pH 3.0, Barbera might get you around 3.1, 3.2 occasionally. But you don't have that luxury of having a little buffer in there of extra SO2 before that wine. You only have 3 to 4 years before that wine starts to oxidize the ink. So it's a tricky thing. There's this weird world that you live in where you can use SO2 because that's part of that ageability equation. I haven't done the ageability equation for you yet. I haven't broken your brain yet. I don't want to do that. I'll wait till later. It'll break your brain. But it's my swag. It's my own equation. I'll have somebody that's good at math look at it. It's a scientific wild ass gas, but SO2 is one of the most powerful tools that we have for making wine aging. Having higher SO2 is going to make your wine more aging. It's going to suck out oxygen for a long time, and so if you have low pH, it's hard to get enough sulfur in that wine to keep it from falling apart. But Rieslings, I've learned that they just don't care, and they make them sweet, and hopefully it binds up enough, and then they crank it a little higher, and hopefully those wines sit on the shelf long enough. But the JJ Crumbs I have for 2022s, they should be pretty lit. We'll see. I may be wrong. We'll see. But why don't we do some measuring and some tasting? How's that sound? And we'll find out if I'm full of shit or not. All right, that's all I got for talk today. I'm going to save your brains. We'll do some practical management tomorrow. I want to get those crumbs out, and let's run some sulfurs and take it from there.